Elon Musk is all set to replace Twitter's Bluebird logo. Why? Because he's planning to build a super app. Now, what is a super app, you may ask? We will tell you in just a bit. But before that, remember, Musk is pushing ahead with plans to rebrand the social network as X. The switch has been a long time coming for Musk, who touted his plans for launching X, the everything app, even before purchasing Twitter. A super app is an app that can do it all. The idea is you can combine messaging, social media, payments, what you get in all the apps in one single app, similar to Chinese WeChat. But how feasible is the idea of super app? Remember, Reliance to Tata all have vied for a super app. Have they been successful or not? Let's find out. Joining us is Siddarth Pai, founder of 314 Capital. Siddarth, appreciate you taking time out this afternoon. I want to begin by asking you, firstly, your first comments on renaming Twitter as X. You know, it's our beloved, everybody's favorite, especially that of techies, entrepreneurs, and us journalists. I'm not sure how relatable X is going to be, but it was a long time coming.
It was actually. I think Twitter is something that is an app that everyone knows about. Everyone loves to hate it. They actually hate to love it. And there's mixed emotions on that. But I think what's important to understand is that Elon Musk has been particularly attracted to the term X.com. Even when he started off his entrepreneurial journey, it was X.com, got merged with PayPal. They wanted to keep it X-PayPal or PayPal X, etc. So I think there's an emotional connect with him over there that is actually required. I think from the brand equity hit that Twitter has taken does actually need an entire change in the positioning of Twitter. And I think since they want to make Twitter not just a social media app and into a super app, a rebranding is also an important component of that itself. Twitter does seem to have the components of a super app, but once again, adoption and using the entire value chain is something we have to look at a little more in detail, which only time will actually end up telling for this.
Okay. And Krishna is also here with us in the studio. Krishna, I want to understand, what is a super app? I mean, for people who are watching out there, they want to know what is a super app. I don't know what Elon's fascination with the word X or the alphabet X is, but clearly X, he's touting to be one of the biggest super apps out there.
Yeah, and as you rightly started off this whole discussion by saying that everybody wants a super app. You have the Tatas with the Tata Neu, in India, everything from Tata Click to everything that was available on Tata Click to other things, it's now put together in one app called Tata Neu. So in that sense, we are all moving towards that super app. But this has been in the making for a while, simply because of the way we see the evolution in China. You have Baidu. You mentioned WeChat, Shweta. There's also Baidu, which is far more than a search engine in China. So in that sense, it's a consolidation move. Also, it reminds me of something like ONDC that you have in India, which is a one platform for all, which is this one super platform, if I may. If you have a government-sponsored super app, then why not private ones, and why not Elon Musk?
Okay.
For God's sakes.
Okay, not a bad proposition at all. Siddarth, what does it take to have a super app? My colleague rightly pointed out there have been attempts made, and as I discussed initially, everybody's trying to build a super app. Nobody's been quite successful just as yet. Paytm was touted to be a super app. Tata Neu was touted to be a super app. But not all attempts have been made successful. Do you think there is a super app that exists in India?
We don't need to have a super app, although we have super apps in various forms. So in order to become a super app, there are three essential components you end up needing. Number one is commerce, number two is communication, and number three is transactions. So transactions include payments from a peer-to-peer network to your bank account, etc. In India, we have UPI, which is actually powering the entire transaction engine of all our financial institutions. We now have commerce that's come under ONDC. It's only communications right now that's actually left outside the ambit. We've already seen the likes of Paytm, we've seen the likes of various others actually get into transfers as well as this one. The commerce to some extent with ONDC as of now. And I think WhatsApp actually had a preeminent position, but WhatsApp UPI is yet to actually take off to a large extent, as well as WhatsApp and ONDC is something that's actually being piloted out as of now. So I think India, we've seen 2/3 of the super app ecosystem end up getting built as part of that. But I think one thing that's important is, while there's a great thing to actually bundle all these services together in a super app, I'm fairly certain in 5-6 years, we'll go through the entire reverse. We'll do a 180 and say that, let's unbundle all this and actually look at them specifically. So I think the super app is actually looked at just another thing in the entire tech zeitgeist that we have.
Siddarth, if I may, I want to ask you was this that, at the end of the day, are you looking at this, the kind of, the idea of a super app as a means for economies of scale for the people who are retailing in the first place? This way, it's easier to sort of get everybody on one platform. In that sense, cost of acquisition per user getting onto the platform becomes lesser. Is it one of those things?
It is. So that's been the theory of the super app for the longest period of time. The moment you can actually monopolize their time and all their transactions as of now, you get an entire 360 view of the consumer. You can end up actually upselling them more options. You can end up actually targeting advertising to them, etc. I think in the future, because of the predominance of both iOS as well as Android, with other seeing super apps, we'll end up seeing the operating system end up subsuming all these apps anyway. I think what Android and Apple are trying to do is through Siri as well as through OK Google. You don't have to end up opening an app for your matter. You just speak to your phone and the phone actually becomes the execution engine for everything. So we're seeing this race to actually look at it from an app perspective versus an operating system and ecosystem perspective. I think the healthy tension between these two is something that's going to underpin the technology unfolding of the coming decade itself.
Right. So the one thing I want to ask you keep talking about Paytm, but the Paytm mall never really took off, if you remember correctly. I remember, I think it was Big Bazaar, Kishore Biani, who was first, got onto the entire Paytm mall bandwagon, but it didn't really go anywhere at the end of the day. And we're still talking about Paytm being the super app, whereas it's barely the super app that it is, that we're referring to it as.
So Paytm is an app where almost any transaction, anything you want to end up executing right now, be it your Paytm games, Paytm travel, Paytm TV, Paytm transactions, Paytm commerce, etc. Like I said, many people have attempted a super app. Nowhere in India have we seen a super app come out successfully. We're now seeing banks trying to end up incorporating ONDC into their frameworks as well. Since they already have transactions, they can get commerce into that also. We've seen UPI try to do something from communication going all the way to transfers and then on to commerce. So I think it's going to be a multi-horse race amongst all of them right now. There are very few chances for an entirely new startup to end up actually coming up during this, because there are deep incumbent forces that already exist in the market right now. But I think if the startups can do anything, it won't be for the 100 million English-speaking consumers, but for the remaining 1.3 billion people who prefer to speak in local languages. I think a super app around a Bharat super app is something that VCs have been looking at for a long period of time, and all of us have our eyes out on that for that as well.
And what is the roadblock, if I may ask, Siddarth? Because by far, I think we can all agree that India has tried, multiple private companies have tried. All eyes have been on building a super app, but we haven't been so successful. Paytm, the story of Paytm Mall not taking off, Tata Neu not getting the sort of user base that it hoped to through its various, mechanisms, way of earning more customer base. None of them have come into fruition so far.
They haven't been super.
They haven't been super. They've not come into fruition. How do you actually build a super app in India, and what's holding us back in India so far?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest failings of most of the super app attempts have actually been understanding the customer journey and customer experience. Now, the way you end up executing a transaction for, let's say, a UPI payment versus actually purchasing something online, end up actually differing to a very large extent. No one's been able to create a cohesive sort of UI, UX, and customer experience for both these parts itself, let alone for the third part of communication also for that matter. So what ends up happening is a super app becomes a sort of jugalbandi of 2 or 3 different apps. And then it breaks in terms of the user flow. It becomes very clunky. It becomes hard to execute. There are numerous failures. That's what actually causes people to end up going to specialized apps as opposed to generalist super apps itself. So I think anyone building a super app can't end up creating one component and then sort of adding the other two like Lego blocks. They will have to end up re-engineering the entire experience, the way they end up actually handling the transaction engines, the way they end up actually presenting it to the customer in order for any of them to become successful in the future.
Okay, I have a point to make here. You're saying that it can't be done this way, but you have something like an Amazon, which is fundamentally good at 2 things, which is e-commerce and its OTT content. And then they're able to do that. They're saying, okay, fine, we're basically an e-commerce player, but we just found a way to make great content and get great content on a platform for that. Okay, we're going to do that. And since all of this involves payments, we're going to do Amazon Pay as well. Now, those all seem like organic extensions for what we're doing. And you're talking about the 180 that we might eventually take with these super apps. And I think, isn't Amazon then an ideal way of doing this? If you want to do multiple services, do multiple related services that are actually, interlinked either way. And that way, the customers make more sense out of, what you're offering.
No, that's actually very true. But to one point where Amazon failed is actually with regard to communication. They tried doing it through Fire OS, through their Fire, this one.
Fair enough.
And all that. But it shows that the promise of even the largest trillion-dollar company in the world ends up actually failing when it comes to, if you look at Google also, Google has Google Chat, Google already has Google Pay, Google already has YouTube and everything for that matter, but these are all separate apps. They're unable to actually combine them into one cohesive experience itself. So like I said, we have building blocks all over the place, but no one's been able to figure out that secret sauce and that magical experience to actually merge everything into one, such that actually becomes your one portal to everything digital going forward.
Mm-hmm. So while there's value proposition in all of this, while there's customer value proposition, it appears to me that you are going to end up burning a hole in your pocket, no matter how big you are, if you're trying to build one super app. In India, we haven't seen the likes of WeChat, like in China, or in a market where everything is combined into one entity, but we do have a vision of what a super app would be, where I don't need to have, Siddarth, 20 apps on my phone, and
China has two super apps, isn't it, Siddarth? You have a WeChat, you have Baidu. And Baidu is far more than a search engine. That's technically the Google of China, but that does like 100 different things apart from search engines as well.
That's true. That's true.
All right. And I think, yes, Siddarth,
yes,
please go on.
No, I think on the super app part, see, we're seeing because you look at the US for that matter, you actually had specialized companies like Facebook, like Google, etc., who became domain experts in something, but tried bleeding on to other parts. Whereas in China, because they didn't actually have external competition coming in, it made it possible for them to incubate these sort of things, better understand the Chinese customer, and the Chinese customers weren't spoiled for choice. When it came to communication, it was only WeChat. When it came to anything commerce, there was only Alibaba for a long period of time, and then others came up. Whereas India, from day one, we've actually had Indian companies as well as foreign companies actually battling it out. So anyone who can figure out a super app for India will actually figure out the super app framework for the rest of the world. So that's why there's a large amount of money being put in. And we also have the government actually creating the rails for a super app through ONDC and UPI itself. So it's only communication that's the last frontier that's actually yet to actually get a government protocol or a government blessed protocol around it. So I think it's going to be very interesting times for people to end up figuring out how to crack the super app equation when it comes to India, because the government has already taken away some of the walled gardens that is previously part of the super apps we've seen either in the US or China itself.
Right. I want to specifically talk about ONDC, where initially I think ONDC did see some success, at least by the way of chatters around ONDC and the way it was being picked up and being touted as a rival to Swiggy and Zomato, and we have taken those discussions up here on News 9, and those were interesting discussions because that pointed towards a cohesive action taken by the government to come up with a public digital infrastructure network to ensure that these facilities are available to other smaller players for free. For people who do not want to pay from their pockets. If I'm somebody who wants to reach out to an ex-customer, I don't have to pay to a platform. I can pay a very nominal fee to the government and get on ONDC. I think if at all, if there's going to be a success story around around super app, my assumption is that it is going to be around ONDC, if at all that picks up. But I think what's keeping us and withholding us from reaching that sort of success with ONDC is the fact that, number one, it's a government platform. Number two, it is slow. There is no promotion, there's no marketing, and and because the steam has sort of faded away, nobody's really talking about it anymore.
No, I think see, the ONDC, what people fail to understand, ONDC is not going to compete directly with a Swiggy, an Amazon, a Flipkart, a Snapdeal, or Reliance, anyone else for that matter. ONDC is actually the common backend that's being created. So ONDC will end up actually powering all these kind of services in India itself. So hence the government, there wasn't much of a need to end up evangelizing the service or putting it out there. I think the one part by ONDC is actually put at a disadvantage. It's because the private players actually have very large budgets for the purpose of promotions, for the purpose of driving discounts and everything like that itself. So it's these kind of factors, because they've invested heavily into their business, most of them are trying to fight ONDC to say that they don't want ONDC to end up actually coming and actually destroying billions of dollars that they've actually invested into their own infrastructure, into their own the client acquisition, etc. So they see ONDC as a threat. So the largest players are yet to end up actually adopting ONDC wholeheartedly itself. I think ONDC as a back-end platform will take a substantial period of time for network effects to end up actually coming out there. Okay. But I think what we start seeing in the future, any new e-commerce company coming out in India will actually be running on ONDC itself. There won't be any proprietary back-end system that ends up applying to that. So consider ONDC like building a bridge for that matter. The moment you end up building a bridge, it will take time for people to discover that bridge and end up going. But once you actually start using that bridge and actually some more people start coming about, the bridge actually does become invaluable. So that's the thing about infrastructure versus your front end or your customer facing apps.
Right, fair enough. While we're discussing all of this, we got to this also because Mr. Musk said that he wants to build a super app. My question here is that even as he struggles to rebuild Twitter, which has lost so much of its advertising revenues, tell us about his chances of being able to build a super app. He's got the capability. As you rightly mentioned, from everything from PayPal, he has done every single one of these things individually before. But to put it together and then put it together with Twitter, which is a completely different service from all of this altogether, which just recently became a service, a paid-for service, which wasn't a paid-for service until very recently. Talk to us about Musk's chances really of X or Twitter X.
Yeah, so I think the one biggest thing Musk actually has is the fact that all his marketing spends actually directly come from him for that matter. So he can actually reduce that part to a large extent itself. So I think if in case he actually does see, but the one thing that Twitter fails to have is the ability for Musk to create these sort of network effects is still there. As a very polarizing figure, there are equal number of people who actually have a strong distaste for him, as well as equal number of people who end up actually believing whatever he says. Now, the problem, if you want to become a super app, you can't become a polarizing figure and actually anger half your audience itself. That means you won't end up getting the network effects. So I think what's going to be important is that while he remains a brand ambassador, he actually needs people with actual domain expertise to piece these disparate systems together and create a proper unified customer experience for all their customers itself. Even Twitter right now ends up breaking to a large extent. Now imagine if you're relying on one app for all your banking transactions, all your communications and everything else. In case something breaks, it's going to be very hard for you to end up actually recovering any amount of data or recovering what's been lost as part of that itself. That vastly differs from social media. So I think the chances of him actually doing this would be to justify the valuation that he has for Twitter, which is publicly admitted he's overpaid for, and he's trying to actually recoup whatever he can as of now. But if execution fails, I think whether he rebrands it as X, Y, Z for that matter, it'll be very hard for Twitter to end up coming back and going back to the glory days that it actually enjoyed a few years ago itself.
All right, that's quite interesting. Regardless of the branding that Elon Musk comes up with, X, Y or Z, if he's not able to recoup some of his losses, it's going to be difficult days ahead for Twitter. But for now, Twitter, of course, trying to rebrand itself and has done so successfully. The logo that you were seeing flashing on your screens, the X logo, is the new logo for Twitter, which will replace the tweet bird we have seen so far. Anybody who's familiar with Twitter, is on Twitter, which I'm assuming most of us are, will see this logo now as opposed to the bird, the blue bird that we were seeing up until today. Siddarth, thanks very much for joining with your inputs on that important story. We will, of course, keep tracking all those details for you.